So we talked about analyzing apathy and addressing it when it comes to non-believers. But let's talk about believers because apathy is a real thing.
Yes.
When we get saved, we're on fire. We're just enchanted and in awe of the gospel and God's glory. But over time, it can, that can wane and it fades and things like that. So as believers, how can we now address that with one another?
Jennifer, you make a great point. I mean, we reflected on the spiritual journey that many of us have taken. Sorry, let me start again. In part one, we reflected a little bit on the spiritual journey that we all have been on as believers. And part of that sometimes is just like you said, when we start off, we have this zeal. We want to talk to everyone about Jesus. We want to share the gospel. And then sometimes after being in those hills, we're in the valleys of feeling indifferent or maybe feeling like we don't feel the presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives like we did before. So what do we do in those moments? I remember reading this book, or part of this book called Present Concerns. And this book contains these somewhat smaller, somewhat maybe even unknown essays of C.S. Lewis's. One of those is called Talking About Bicycles. You're probably like, where am I going with this? But just stick with me for a second and you'll see. So he relates the journey that we go on with bicycles to our spiritual journeys. So he has these four sort of stops along the journey that he talks about. It's unenchantment, enchantment, disenchantment, and reenchantment. So I have four kids, Braden, Bryson, Braylon, and Brevin. Yes, I'm fond of names that start with B. But I think about them in terms of this journey, right? So Brevin is our youngest. He's 2 years old. We have this sort of like bike thing that we bought for him. It doesn't have wheels. It has wheels. It doesn't have pedals, but it's like something that will just help him to learn what it means to like sit up on a bike and to have that form. But he's utterly unenchanted by that thing. It sits in a corner, and really the only ones that play with it is my 5 and 6 year old. So Brevin is utterly unenchanted by the idea of bicycles at this age. But then you have my 5 and 6 year old, Braylon and Bryson. They love their bicycles. And with the attention of their parents, they're riding up and down the street, up and down the driveway. They love their bicycles. So they're enchanted by the idea of bicycles. But, for many of us, life happens. You go to school, you get a job, a full-time job. And for some of us, as enchanted as we were with riding bicycles at one stage of our lives, we sort of get unenchanted with it. That's how I was. My bike just sat up in the garage for the longest collecting cobwebs just because there were other demands on my life, and I just didn't have time for riding a bicycle. But then you have my oldest, Braden, who's now 14. He's sort of at that age where he can start to ride a little bit further, but not too far without some parental guidance. So I became re-enchanted by the idea of riding bicycles so I can ride with my oldest son, Braden. So C.S. Lewis, again, talks about this journey in relation to bicycles, but he says, hey, we also go on this journey in other aspects of our lives. Think about in your spiritual journey. Maybe at one point you were unenchanted by the idea of spiritual things or about Christianity, but then the Holy Spirit captured your heart and you became enchanted by it. But then oftentimes, like I mentioned before, there's these moments of apathy or indifference, and you may feel disenchanted by the whole idea at that time, or perhaps other things come into your lives. But then something happens and you're re-enchanted. So it's these hills and valleys. It's this journey that we go on. But a lot of people get stuck in that third position of disenchantment. So the question is, when we're in there, how do we address the apathy or the indifference that's sometimes inherent to disenchantment? See, you can feel a sense of disenchantment about a number of things in your life that can have this ripple effect on your faith and lead you to feeling apathetic. Or more directly, for a number of reasons, you can feel a sense of disenchantment that can manifest itself as apathy with your faith. So just as in part one, we had this four-pronged paradigm, which was we thought about this. It's the same one: patience, probing, presence, and persistent prayer. But for this one, I'm going to switch the order of the first two, and I'm going to start with probing. Now, we live very busy lives. We're constantly distracted by our cell phones, by our tablets, by all our TVs, all these devices, right? And oftentimes, it can be hard to take some time aside and really probe your life. If you're someone who's indifferent, or you know someone who's feeling apathetic about their faith at that time, I want to encourage you to encourage yourself, or maybe others, to take some time away, to think about, why am I feeling this way? Or perhaps, why am I not having any real zeal or interest in my faith at the moment? Why am I feeling apathetic? Have there been some changes in my life? Is apathy maybe rooted in some type of doubt about my faith that I'm feeling? And perhaps, is it a sin that we're holding secretly that's often contributing, that's contributing to the apathy that we're feeling? I remember in reading in Psalm chapter 32, when David sort of reflected on the sin that he was dealing with Bathsheba and that whole scenario. And he writes, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer." Perhaps that's how you're feeling right now. Perhaps you're feeling like you don't have any strength, any vitality in your faith. Where probing it can be a helpful way in really analyzing what's at the root of my indifference. I remember the times where I felt this incredible energy, where I wanted to talk to everyone about my faith. So what changed in my life? And just as we talked about probing, let's also move to presence, because presence can help with the probing. Presence has to do with the trusted voices of people in your lives. Getting the advice of others around you who know you well, who maybe know some things going on in your life, and just asking them, hey, have you noticed anything going on with me in particular, or anything that may contribute to apathy or indifference, or however I'm feeling, or just have a clarifying conversation with them where they can maybe ask you some questions to help you think about why you're feeling this way. Having the presence of other believers in your life is so important, and it's a part of the communal aspect of what it means to be a part of the Christian faith. It's why we call each other brothers and sisters. We're not supposed to do the Christian life alone. We're encouraged to do it in community with others. So remember to have trusted voices in your life, because sometimes they can even help you to think about, give you advice on some ways in which to deal with that apathy. Maybe it's rooted in disciplines around more regular Bible reading or perhaps fasting or other things. But there's no one size fits all. It really depends on what's going on in your life, and others around you can help you to mind whatever it is that's at the root of that apathy. But also, my notes are terrible here. Oftentimes it can be easy for us to get down on ourselves too. And I can't tell you how many stories I've heard about people who have ultimately left the faith. Their zeal continued to wane over time, and they got to the point where they ultimately decided to leave the faith. But let me encourage you to be patient with yourself. Just as we reflected on our spiritual journey again in part one, and being the patience that God had for us and the patience that we should have for others, be patient with yourself as well. And know it is a spiritual journey. There's a reason why sanctification, or the process of us becoming more like Christ, is a process. A process isn't always just uphill. Sometimes there's 2 steps forward, there's 1 step back. Sometimes there's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. But if we remain faithful, then God will see that process through. So in those moments where you're feeling apathetic, where you're feeling indifferent, remember to be patient. Don't jump to any conclusions or anything that you'll regret later. Stay in the presence of other believers, and also remember to continue to probe and think about what is at the root of this. And finally, prayer. Prayer is so important. There's this parable in Luke 18. It's not one of the parables that's talked about a lot, like the one of the lost coin or the prodigal son, but it's the parable of the persistent widow. And basically, it's this widow who goes to this unjust judge and is pleading. She's petitioning for him about something. He constantly is rejecting her. And finally, he says, listen, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in these things, but listen, just so you'll leave me alone, I'll give you what you want. And Jesus sort of reflects on this parable. He's saying, like, if this unjust judge will ultimately give this widow who's persistent what she wants, how much more will a just God give you what you persist about? This is an important reminder for us to persist in both prayer and faithfulness. As Jonathan Edwards once said, prayer should be as natural an expression of faith as breathing is to life. Is prayer a regular aspect of our life? Are you only praying perhaps when you're asking God for something? Are you thanking him for the wonderful things in your life? Are you asking him for guidance about things that you may be unsure about? As Jonathan Edwards again said, prayer should be as natural as breathing. Think about 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 through 7. It says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Sometimes apathy can be rooted in anxieties of different sort. Anxieties about our life, or different aspects of our life, anxieties about our family, about our job. And it's these things that is creating so much of a distraction and busyness in our lives that our faith is sort of pushed to the side. But here, Peter is reminding us to cast our anxieties on him. And those last four words are so important. I want to leave you with those words. He cares for you. No matter where you are in your life, you're feeling apathetic. You're feeling indifferent. You're frustrated. You're suffering. You're having doubts. Know that Jesus Christ cares for you, and he will not leave you in whatever state you may feel that you're in. Persist in prayer and faithfulness, and he will be there with you all along.
Thank you for watching Everyday Theology. For more content like this, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.